Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast, where we invite you to spend just a few minutes with the staff at Cook Library. I'm Daniel Smith, the genealogy librarian, and you are listening to the Local Genealogists Speak podcast series. In this episode, we are hearing from a local genealogist about their experiences doing family history research. We are also listening for their tips and suggestions for doing genealogy. As a librarian, I am convinced that we all learn from each other, and we all have valuable information to share. By the way, this episode will be a part of a larger series of interviews with local genealogists, so be on the lookout for others. Today, I am joined by George, a local genealogist who has graciously agreed to answer questions about ancestral travel, archival research, genealogy books, and more. In honor of the 250th anniversary of the United States, George will also share a favorite part of American history. Thank you for joining us, George. As we begin, I would love to ask you, why did you start researching your family history?
Well, thank you, Daniel, for inviting me. First of all, I just want to say I'm not a professional genealogist in any sense. I have no credentials whatsoever. I just enjoy doing it and helping others whenever I can. But to answer your question, I grew up having very little contact with extended family. They all lived far away, so I might see some of them once a year if I was lucky. I knew the names of grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins, but I never got to hear their stories. Later on, my mom was into genealogy, even making what they used to call an elder hostel trip to Salt Lake City, but she only got so far with it because there was nothing online back then. I've always been interested, but didn't have much time for it until I retired, and it's just as well because it's so much easier now.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that just a little bit. And I always love that even if we're not professional genealogists necessarily, we all still have things to share, and we've all learned things along the way that I think everyone can benefit from. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I do respect all the training and testing that professional genealogists go through. I try to live up to their standards, but that kind of certification just hasn't been important to me at this point.
Makes sense. Totally. So if it comes to speaking to those who are just kind of beginning to start their genealogy journey and just beginning to do their family history research, I'm curious, do you have any tips for those? And if they are, what would they be?
Sure. First of all, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with things that are out there. And I'm generally not a goal-oriented person, but I found it helpful to make some goals just to keep myself focused. So I decided I wanted to, first of all, trace my ancestors back to the immigrants that came to this country and find out where they came from. I wanted to understand, why did they come here? What was the context for where they were living then and when they came here? Then figure out not only just they themselves, but who did they follow or who followed them or who did they come with? A serial migration kind of thing. And then trace where they went throughout America. Why did they migrate from town to town? What was, again, the historical context, the social context? What were they doing? And then not only for my ancestors, but then to attempt to trace all of their descendants. So, third cousins, fourth cousins, fifth cousins, which ends up being thousands of people. That's why it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's a job that will never end. But again, just seeing how did the broader family evolve over the years down to today. But regardless of whatever goals you might have as a listener, I would recommend do yourself a favor. Keep track of places you've looked and what you did or didn't find there. Otherwise, you're going to end up spinning your wheels. And whatever you do find something, make sure that you save information about the source so that you can cite it properly and so that you and others can find it again in the future. You don't have to worry about, okay, is this, Chicago Manual of Style citation, whatever. But make sure you note down enough details so that, if you forget where you found it, you could look at that information and go back and find it again. Or if, your grandchildren are reading your notes, they can go back and find those same sources.
Thank you. I think I really appreciate how realistic you were about it, and how honest you were as well. I think that sometimes it's really easy to get overwhelmed when you start thinking about all your family. But, if you start small and you keep working at it, you learn that you get a lot of information just by kind of starting, like you said, with just, one family member focusing on immigration, something like that. And then you can kind of course, begin to cite so you know where you've been, and then you can kind of get a sense of where you need to go after that. I think a lot of us have, and you hinted at it here, some immigrant, of course, all of us have immigrant ancestors at some point, and it's always sometimes a challenge to research those, but I know that some folks find it really helpful if they go to locations where they think their ancestors may have been, and it sounds like you've done some ancestral travel yourself, so I would love to hear a little bit more about that and how it helped your genealogy research.
Sure, yeah. In the past couple of years, I visited a couple of small towns in Germany and Canada. The best part was meeting present-day fifth or sixth cousins in person, having previously met them online as a result of their research or mine. And even though it's so easy now to explore distant places virtually without leaving home, there's nothing quite like being there in person, breathing the air, seeing what it feels like. Of course, when my ancestors lived there, these places didn't have electricity or plumbing, but neither did the places they emigrated to here in this country at that time. So it must have been very difficult for them, and it's really good just to kind of try to get that feeling for the land they left and the land they came to.
I agree, yeah. I've had a chance to do a little bit of that travel myself, and there's something about being in an area, even if there isn't an actual house that they lived in, but just being in the place, knowing that they may have walked on that same street
right.
or been at least had a farm in the area. Something about that is just really enriching. Something about you kind of feel the spirit of your ancestors in a way.
Exactly, yeah. And these small towns are still very much small towns. They have modern convenience stores and things like that, but you can still see the cobblestone streets and the old churches and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Continuing with the traveling theme, it sounds like you've also done some traveling to some archives and libraries, and I'd love to hear about how that's also helped your research.
Yeah, I have. Well, so we are very lucky to have three great libraries relatively close. There's, the Newberry downtown. There's the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and the Wisconsin Historical Society Library and Archives in Madison. Each of these, in spite of their names, has tons of genealogical material from across the country and beyond. If you can visit a local library or historical society in your place of interest, though, you might find things you can't find elsewhere. And you'll definitely find very helpful people with deep local knowledge. It's also possible to make use of archives that you can't visit in person. Besides whatever they might have online, you can often order copies of documents or borrow microfilms through interlibrary loan. I've done that with archives in Germany and Canada.
Yeah, that's encouraging. It's always still a shock sometimes in today's day and age to learn that not everything is online. I mean, that we're talking about, hundreds, if not millions of pages that just aren't possible to scan. So sometimes we have to go and travel. So I love that you've taken the opportunity to go those places and also recognize that even if you can't travel, there are still some things you can access online and some things that you can find, or maybe even do some sort of mail correspondence if that sort of thing is available to you. So speaking of books, libraries, of course, are full of books, and it sounds like you also have some books that you would like to recommend to those who are listening.
Sure, yes. I brought a few of my favorites with me here from the library shelves. These aren't necessarily totally genealogy specific, but they obviously touch on genealogy and family history. The first one is She Has Her Mother's Laugh by Carl Zimmer, which is primarily about DNA more than genealogy, but it's quite fascinating. And if you do get into the DNA side of genealogy, I really recommend that, so that you get a good scientific background and all sorts of other information about DNA. Redlined by Linda Gartz talks about redlining, obviously, in the Chicago area in the 1950s or so. It's really just a fascinating story about how the city changed, and of course then how the suburbs changed as well. So all of the societal implications of that, and there's a family history component too. Future Face by Alex Wegner talks about implications of race in family history and genealogy. I couldn't really relate to either of those books on a personal level, but it was for that very reason they helped me broaden my horizons.
Great. Thank you for recommending those. They do sound like great topics, and I think one of the themes I picked up from this interview with you is the importance of looking at kind of the larger history. I think that's something that may sometimes get neglected or overlooked by genealogists, especially as we focus on our specific family and we want to find when they were born, when they died, maybe when they were buried, maybe where they're married as well. And those sort of details are very important, but kind of getting a larger sense of the social context and the history that surrounded them is also just as equally important and kind of brings their story to life. So thank you for sharing some options for folks who, if they want to learn a little bit more deeply about maybe history that impacts their family or history that just in general impacted other folks around them. So speaking of history, it's now come our time to talk about America 250. And as we celebrate America 250 this year, one of the things I'm excited to hear from you about is your favorite part of American history.
Sure. I really like reading about the first half of the 1800s. It's a time when a lot of Americans, including my mother's ancestors, were on the move within the country. Books I particularly enjoy are What Hath God Wrought by Daniel Walker Howe. And there's a series of books by Alan Taylor, specifically for this time period. The one would be American Republics. Other books in the series are American Colonies, American Revolutions, American Civil Wars. The plural there is because the author looks not just at the United States of America, but all the other North American countries and what was going on during those time periods. So it's a really good, broad historical context.
Thank you for sharing those. Yeah. We get a sense of what happens in our country, but then how our country is intersecting with other things that are happening in the world. So I really appreciate that. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and experiences with us today, George. We hope that those online enjoyed listening and learning from George, and hopefully you are inspired by something he shared or said. Maybe he even gave you an idea to help further your own research. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with those who you think would also be interested. One of the best things you can do to support us is to take a moment to comment or leave a rating for this podcast. Those comments and ratings help get this podcast noticed. We'll be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.